Hello, hello, and welcome to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories here on KFred Radio. I'm Janet Munro. I'm a birth mother, a storyteller, and perhaps most importantly, a listener of stories. I believe our roots shape us, but they don't have to define us. Today, I'm joined by author, entrepreneur, and adoptee, Mark Jamilkowski. Mark's story is fascinating. Though he grew up as an only child with loving parents, he was always aware of being adopted, but had no urgent desire to locate his birth family. But this is where the fascinating part comes in. When the desire arose in him, the journey he took became the inspiration for his novel, For the Road to Rescue. It's a story that explores the family, the identity, the loss, the resilience, and the powerful connections that link one generation to the next. After the success of that novel, Mark also wrote about one of history's most famous adoptees, and most finest, Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, offering a fascinating perspective of how adoption has shaped lives throughout history. Today, we'll talk to Mark about his adoption journey, the search for his roots, the stories we inherit, and how adoption can influence not only who we are, but the stories we choose to tell. So please join me in welcoming Mark Jamilkowski to Roots and Branches Adoption Stories.
Wow,
So glad to have you here, Mark.
Thank you, Janet. What a fantastic introduction. That was really phenomenal. I wish I'd recorded it.
Well, thank you. So let's start off at the beginning, your adoption story. You were adopted at birth, or go from there?
Yes, I was adopted at birth. Circumstances really weren't well known to me. Only after I did my research and found my birth mother and talked with the social workers directly did I find out what the real circumstances were. But it always been told me that it was a Polish secretary and an Italian banker. And in the 1960s, New Haven, Connecticut, that's all you needed to know. And then 9 months later, there was going to be a baby, and then there was going to be an adoption, and everybody went their own way back to the pews of the Catholic Church they all go to, and everything was going to be just fine. And that was kind of the beginning. My mom told a very heartwarming story about how they had tried multiple times themselves to have a baby and had 3 or 4 miscarriages, and the doctor told her that under no circumstances was she ever to try again because she had very thin uterine walls and the blood loss would kill her. So do not try to have a baby, adopt. So they were going through the process, and then I guess a social worker or whoever called her up and said, "We got you. There's a child coming, and we need you to be at the hospital this day to receive." So it was all very quick and sudden for them. And then they were nervous. My mom was trying to give me a bottle as I was swaddled up, fresh from being born and wiped off and everything. And she dropped me. She dropped me. The top came off the milk bottle. We were both soaking wet. I was crying. She was crying. My father was crying.
Memories.
I mean, it was
one, but the story
something that as I thought it was funny, but my mom was traumatized by the event. She was, "Oh my God, they're going to take this baby away from me," type of thing. But it was a wonderful start to our story together.
Did you grow up in New Haven, Connecticut?
We started in New Haven. We spent some time briefly there, then a few towns north of that, and ultimately I ended up growing up in Avon, Connecticut, which is just a little bit north and west of Hartford, Connecticut, the capital. Yeah.
Now, you had said that you knew that you were adopted.
Yeah, right from the get-go. As soon as I could understand words, my parents had always told me how special I was, and adoption by no means distanced me from them, but rather was a sign of their love and how I was very sort of sent. I was God sent in terms of, the way they saw it, um, to be their little angel and so forth and so on. The things that parents tell a small child. But the love and the support that they showered on me gave me no pause or any hesitation to believe anything they had said. This was a miracle to them because of their trouble having their own child, and uh, they were more than willing to pour everything and all of their attention and all their love into me as a result. So it was a very supportive, very open, and very welcoming environment. Um, they I think they were just following advice in terms of being open and transparent about the arrangement. Um, I don't know that they ever thought of going through any level of counseling or therapy or associated with it. They okay, well, this is the reality of the situation, and here you are, you're adopted. It did result in some funny stories though along the way because I was just so commonplace about it. Yeah, I'm adopted, no big deal. It was something I just knew from day one and had always accepted. We were in, I think, fourth grade. I want to say fourth grade. And we were doing a science project around genetics, genes, understanding, how things get passed on and traits and so forth and so on. And we were supposed to, for a homework assignment, we're supposed to come home with a family tree.
Okay.
So what do you think? I walked in the following day with a blank tree. And because, I mean, I understood the consequence of everything that was going on, right? I'm supposed to be writing down names of people who I'm genetically tied to. Well, I had no names. I just handed in a blank tree, and I was called to task for that, and I explained the circumstance. Needless to say, some of my classmates were not as well understanding and had not been exposed to the circumstance, so they didn't understand what was going on. Um, but yeah, it was. You look back on that, and it was probably traumatic for me in the moment, but looking back on it, it's kind of humorous.
Did you get bullied at all in school for being adopted?
Orphaned. Yeah, you're an orphan. Your parents didn't love you. You were tossed out on the street like garbage. You're lucky anybody cared. That kind of stuff. Yeah. Oh, kids will find a million different ways to be mean to each other. Um, it wasn't like people went out of their way for it. It was usually something that came up when I'm having an argument with somebody else. Usually because they were trying to bully me for something else, and then that becomes the tool of one of their arrows in their quiver that they would pull out and run at me. Maybe it bothered me the first couple of times, and I just realized they were being ignorant.
Oh, I'm
Or at
glad
least,
you
at
were
least that's how
fighting
my
up back
parents
then.
helped me. Yeah,
Yes. So your parents were supportive all the time.
all the time, 100%,
All right.
absolutely.
So
Yeah.
one of the things you did say in our pre-interview was that you fantasized a lot when you were growing up. What did you fantasize about?
I kind of replaying the circumstances around what the original relationship was like and what my birth parents were going through and the challenges that they faced. Of course, it was all fantasy. I had no idea if it really was an Italian banker. I had no idea of really knowing if it was a Polish secretary that went to Europe and disappeared for 9 months while she had his baby, and kind of, and all came back to give birth. And I mean, I had no idea if any of that was true. But that was the fantasy about trying to understand or kind of put the context into my being, right? It wasn't until I started therapy for our separate issue about 12 years ago that the concept that I guess psychologists have been using around a primal wound, the idea of being separated from the physical experience of being separated from the mother that you have just spent 9 months growing inside of evidently leaves something. There's a gap there that I guess they understand better now, um, but it wasn't anything that anybody talked about in the 1960s, to be certain.
No, I gave birth to my son in 1970, and no one had ever heard of the primal wound, and had
Right,
no idea the concept of the fetus that was in you for 9 months actually missing you
right,
when they're
right.
taken from you. But when you think about it, that's all they've known. They've only
Sure,
heard your voice, they've only felt your emotions, they've heard the people around you. That's all they know, and that's what makes them content. And now all of a
right.
sudden they're pulled away and they have nothing like that.
Strangers, bunch of strangers hanging around
Yeah.
you now. Yeah.
So I don't know how you correct that or how you can help that. Someone said, I was talking to a lady who's a surrogate mom, and
Mm.
she said that she likes to get from the surrogate parents, she likes to get a recording of them reading a story so that she can put it on her belly so the baby can hear the voices and get to know these
Oh,
voices. And
that's
just has an idea that,
gives a whole new concept to that Memorex advertisement, right? Is it live or is it Memorex? It's sort of,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So there
Uh,
are ways that we can adjust to that. But tell me,
yeah.
how old were you when you decided that you wanted to find your birth parents?
Yeah, I was in my late 40s. And I actually didn't start seeking therapy for this specifically. I was going through other issues, a lot of frustration in my life that was manifesting itself in uh, very dangerous and destructive ways. And that led me to seek professional help to try to diffuse myself and better understand what was driving my levels of frustration, and ultimately how I could improve on myself, personal growth. It was suggested to me during the course of that um, one of the places that we should start our journey was to unpack the whole adoption thing and to see if we could find what the truth was, and maybe have a better understanding for what was going on in those early formative months, literally formative months, that could have planted seeds in me that ultimately grew to be what I was experiencing at that point in my life. Right. Um, that's when I discovered that, uh, again, through some crazy circumstances and dumb luck, um, happened to land on the right agency and they had the right information and they were able to connect me. And that's when I found out that there was the actual circumstances were not as intriguing, perhaps, or as romantic, right, as an office tryst and all that. It was a situation of ovarian cancer, which was going to result in a hysterectomy because of how severe it was, for a woman who already had 3 boys and was a single mother, divorced from an abusive relationship. And yeah, and here I was coming down a whole nother problem, kind of situation to have for her to have to grapple with. And the problem for her was, on one hand, being very Catholic and religious and all that. Um, she felt a duty, and she, as a mother already of 3 boys, she wanted to have her child. It's her child, right? So there was already a sense of bond. This is my kid, type of thing, and I want to raise this child. And on the other hand, there's this very real practical element of the fact that there was a question of whether she was going to survive her cancer treatments and her surgery and the chemotherapy that was going to follow. And she already had 3 boys to feed. So, what was she going to do? How was she going to support a fourth mouth, especially an infant? So all kinds of very real world practical challenges kind of emerged with this. And for months, she went through the advice seeking with her priests, with therapists, doctors, trying to figure out a way to make it work. And at the end of the day, it just wasn't. It wasn't going to. In fact, they had to do a C-section and pull me out a month early because the doctors couldn't wait anymore. Her cancer had grown to such an extent that they needed to operate on her right away. So very scary, very anxious, a very upsetting period of time in her life was my grand awakening. If you will. It's like, welcome to the world.
So,
Yeah.
how did you end up finding her? What
Yeah.
prompted?
Well, once we set in motion the idea that I was going to find her, I was like, well, I knew I was born in New Haven, and I knew it was what year it was, and so I tried to find, of all things, the Yellow Pages, right? And the Library of Congress, for anybody who's interested, keeps the Yellow Pages. So you can find electronic copies of the Yellow Pages for just about anywhere, anytime, any year, to the extent they were produced. So I found the 1967 Yellow Pages, 1970 Yellow Pages, and like the 1973 Yellow Pages for New Haven, Connecticut, and I looked to see what adoption agencies served that area and which ones were still around, right? So by if you were there in 1967 and you were also there by 1974, and then I could get a phone number for you off of that new thing called the internet, of course, um, you know, going back, right, over 10 years, it was still a relatively new thing. Um, I was able to get a couple phone numbers, and the first one I called, the phone line was disconnected, and then I don't know, that was the third or fourth one that I called. The woman who answered the phone literally said, "You have got to be joking," because evidently my file was on her desk, and she was going through the process of going through some archives, and my folder was literally the next one that she was about to deal with at that. So it was pretty crazy. And that started the whole process. That agency said, "Well, we think we have some information. We have a search firm that does some identity validation. You need to submit some information. We'll do some research to make sure we've got the right address and contact information for the birth mother. And then we'll have you draft a brief statement, which we'll reach out to her with, and then we'll find out if she's interested in talking to you, and then we'll do some brokered communications back and forth between the two of you. And if everything is good and you guys still want to keep talking with each other, we'll get out of the way." That's the process. And that's what I did. Yeah. It
Well,
was,
I like the way you say the Library of Congress. So for anybody who's searching,
yeah.
you know where to find the Yellow Pages now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
It's,
to make
it
it
was,
happen.
it was kind of, I was like, wow, really? And it's online, so it's, it was, again,
It was amazing.
research through internet-based resources kind of made it possible without me having to hire a private detective.
Okay. You had that correspondence with your mom then, back and forth?
Yeah, yeah. We initially, I was trying to write letters, but I did not know that her arthritis in her hand basically prevented her from really being able to hold a pen or to write. And she didn't really have a computer, so she didn't type on a keyboard. She had a cell phone that she would talk into, so we started texting each other, and she would, I would get these long text messages from her because she just start talking, and the thing is transcribing, and she's speaking in broken English, so it's transcribing everything that she's saying. Um, yeah, it was, and that's the kind of way we communicate back and forth with each other. Occasionally, we would talk to each other on the phone itself. Um, and then I went down to visit her once. it was an interesting journey, and I didn't really know what I was looking for or what I would get out of it. It was more or less just putting one foot in front of the other and trusting the process, if you will. Um, and it's actually one of the first things that I think is a common question. Birth. I was warned by the social worker who connected us that one of the first things birth parents who have been in out of somebody's life, especially for 50 years, which is what it was at that point, right? When they first get contacted, the first question they have often is, well, suspicion. What do you want?
Yeah.
I don't have money. Don't bother me. What do you want? Um, which is, I guess, evidently the same thing that happens the other way when if she had reached out to me, I guess my first suspicion, if I was textbook case, would be, well, why are you trying to reach out to me now? What do you want? I don't have any money. Leave me alone. Our relationship wasn't like that, though. Um, so all of the warning signs, all the guardrails, all of the alerts that the social worker had prepared me to try to be on the lookout for weren't there. We cleared all the traps and just started having a normal conversation about stuff. One of the biggest challenges for me in the nature of those conversations, however, was her attempt to take ownership of the newfound relief that she had. It was challenging for me because I wasn't really able to kind of give that. You know what I mean? She was taking something that I wasn't really giving. She was trying to take it from me. She was taking away the agency of the interaction by claiming it as, in essence, her salvation. Oh, the weight has been lifted off of my soul. My boy is returned to me. Um, uh, that kind of thing. And I was like, that was difficult for me, I have to say, because while I recognized, you know, the validity of her emotions and how she could love me as being my mother and somebody who gave birth to me, she wasn't my mother from my perspective, right?
Yes.
From my perspective, this was all brand new. And this was a relationship with somebody who I shared a genetic pool with. But for me, it was more of an investigation into a person as opposed to a mother, right? There's a fine distinction there. So I would tell her, I said, listen, Clara, uh, the strongest thing that you probably ever did in your life, and probably the bravest thing you ever did in your life, was to give me up for adoption. I understand completely how painful that was for you and how difficult of a decision it was for you. But given everything else that was going on in your life, why ultimately it was the right decision for you to make. And in making that decision, you gave me the opportunity to be able to grow up to be the man that I am. I'm not your salvation, however. So whatever your life has been like for the past 85 years, that's on you, right? I'm not here to save your soul. I'm not here to give you redemption. There's no essence of forgiveness to be given because there was nothing to hold against you. It wasn't like, oh, Clara, I hate you. No, I forgive you now. Now I love you. It wasn't like that. It was, I didn't hate her. I didn't know her. And I was trying to get a chance to know her, but she was wanting to take that forgiveness. She was wanting to take that salvation. She was wanting to take that favorable judgment for herself. And I was like, listen, that's within you. right? You have to give yourself that. And at the end of the day, I realized that was the gift. That was the gift. In my interactions with Clara, getting to know her and closing out and understanding, getting closure, right, around the understanding of identity and place and origin, all very important. But more than anything else, it taught me about the empathy needed not only for other people, but also the compassion needed for oneself. Um, so that was the important takeaway. That was the thing that I got out of that relationship. The how she needed to find it within herself to. She clearly was holding something, right? She was holding some element of guilt. She was holding some element of, I don't know, shame, whatever it was. Mostly guilt, I think. She just felt like there was something she didn't do something that she was supposed to do, and I was like, no, you did exactly what you were supposed to do, and was trying to make sure that she understood that she needed to forgive herself because it wasn't me, right? I didn't have any ill feelings towards her, so.
Did you find any traits that were the same, like nature versus nurture kind of thing?
When I had a chance to meet a couple of my brothers, because she had three sons prior to me. We do share some similar physical traits, even though I have a different father than they do. There were some very physical traits that were common amongst all of us, and um, there are some. I would say there's probably some personality traits too. Um, Probably one of I don't know if it's unique. Of course, it's not unique to anybody specifically, but she was a fighter her whole life. She knew hard work, and she had a temperament that really didn't suffer. She did not suffer fools gladly, right? She was quick witted and told you exactly what she was feeling, and whether you liked it or not, she was going to tell you. I think that I may not be as extreme as her. I think she was a little abrasive at times, but I think a fair amount of that work ethic and some of the sharp tongue kind of reaction is the temperament. The she 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 that was definitely something she handed down to me. And I think actually, now that you mention it, thinking back on it, one of the other things that I remember taking away from that whole time period, she had a very frustrating and angry life. Her relationship with her mother was fraught with all types of conflict and traumas and challenges. She overcame a lot of that and was able to persist and persevere in a way that led to a fair amount of success for herself. And ultimately, she survived her cancer and she raised her three kids and off she went. But the frustration and where that frustration came from, that the translation of that frustration into a feeling of physicality, to act out on that frustration, to be angry, to raise one's voice. Um, there was elements of that in me as well, right? And so there's this element of passing along traits. Now I would have to say that by the same token, my adoptive parents, my parents, I just by virtue of just terminology, I have my parents and I have my birth parents.
Right.
Uh, um, my parents were also frustrated. in a different way. And they also expressed their frustration through a fair amount of physical outbursts and acting out, which got exasperated with alcohol. So my upbringing kind of had these similar but different parallels. Um, my objective with therapy was to try to get beyond that and to be a better person, right? And to break the cycle. Um, and I think that to some extent, people say, oh, well, you acknowledge that. So that's already a step in the right direction. It's like, yeah, okay, sure. But there's following through. You have to work very hard to make it a reality on a daily basis, and overcoming the history and overcoming the genetic predisposition towards acting out on these frustrations ultimately is what breaks that cycle, right? So nature versus nurture comes into play. Only in this case, nature and nurture both had very similar blueprints. Um, and I don't know if it was generational to the 60s. I don't, and, with a European upbringing and, Middle European upbringing, uh, I don't know. As it turns out, my birth parents both, one was from has Slovenia and Italian. Okay, Italian and German. Okay, and my parents are also Polish and Italian. So it was it's very much, I did a 23andMe genetic map, right? And, my genetic pool is all over the place, which not unexpected, at any given point in time, Italy was controlled by the French, was controlled by the Austrians, it was controlled by the Germans, it was controlled by the Carthaginians, the Greeks, the Turks, and everybody was there. So it doesn't surprise you that if you say you're Italian or you have Italian blood in you, you actually have genetic markers from basically everywhere in Europe. But yeah, my genetic epicenter, if you will, is like Ljubljana, Slovenia. So, but the circle extends to like a good part of the Ukraine, southern part of Poland. I don't know how they do all that stuff. It's fascinating to me how they like bring those markers and they like tell you all this stuff. But Germany, France, northern part of Italy, it's okay.
So did you ever meet your birth dad?
I had one brief conversation with him on the phone. When I introduced myself to him on the phone, his response was, "What do you want?" Okay, as I already said, that's to be expected, not a problem. I said nothing. I'm perfectly well situated. Everything is fine on my end. I don't have any health issues. I'm not asking you for any personal details. I just thought you'd like to know I exist. And he goes, "Great. Everything's good?" "Yes." "All right. So that worked out for the best for the both of us." And that was pretty much it. that was pretty much the end of our conversation. He did tell me a couple of funny stories because I, of course, wasn't going to. I said, "Listen, I've tracked you down this far. I'm going to get at least a couple of stories out of you. What was the relationship like? What was going on?" And he only told me parts of it, and I had to piece together some of the other elements of it that I ultimately put into the book. But I thought the funniest one was when they broke up. He came home from work one day and he found the house empty except for a cardboard box, an empty cardboard box. And he didn't say it, but I thought about it and I was like, it was like a message, right? I have taken everything you own and I have left you nothing. So much so that I don't have anything to put in this last empty box. This is it. This is all you have left is this empty box. So she did. She took the silverware. She took the drapes. She's the carpets. She literally cleaned the house out completely. And he's like, I don't even know where she got the money to do any of this stuff. All I know is I came home and my house was literally empty.
And was he the father of the other three children?
No, no,
No.
he was
Okay.
not. No. Um, he was a friend, or if he wasn't a friend, he served in the same military unit as the person who was the father of the other three. But they would have known each other from the army base in Stuttgart, Germany, and served there during the end of World War II and into the 1950s. That was their. That's how they all kind of came to a head, came to meet each other. Um, Clara lived her life for the most part following Max Strub, who was her stepfather. Max Strub was a famous German violinist, famous in international circles, and uh, they had him running around and researching archives and trying to find musical pieces and artifacts that were pure German, even though they were spread into other areas of that the conquered territories, especially Poland. So she spent a lot of time in Germany and Poland and whatnot, as opposed to Italy. Um, and then when the whole front fell and the Russians came in, they escaped the Russians and ended up in in near, not on, but near the military base in Stuttgart.
What made you decide to write the book?
As a mistake? No, circumstances beyond my control. It was really strange set of circumstances. So my conversations with Clara were circular, right? Especially since a lot of times she was talking to me through a text app, and when we would talk on the phone, I would try to connect dots, but her life just went all over the place, and she zoomed, literally zoomed, mentally zoomed all over. And so I would have to like bring her back to kind of ask more questions and try to understand how it all happened. And I was just curious about her life. I was just asking, how did you end up in New Haven, and how did you meet this guy, and what was it like growing up in Germany, and that kind of stuff, right? Um, I guess in a lot of ways, I was being like an investigative reporter. Right? I was trying to unlock as much as I could about her and her life to perhaps better understand her and her mentality and her state of mind and her position in life that led to me. You know, um, I kept asking myself why, a lot of whys, right? Or how? How did you end up in Germany? How did you end up where? Why were you in Poland when the Russians showed up? How did you get to Poland? What were the circumstances that made you leave Italy and go there? And that kind of stuff. Then ultimately, the question around, um, well, why did you seek out a relationship with this other guy when you already had three kids? What made you go to Michigan to seek this guy out as being a potential other suitor when you had a full blown career at Yale New Haven Hospital as a physician's assistant for all intents and purposes, right? Not a full blown nurse, but not an administrative aide, something in between, not a candy striper. It's sort of an in between kind of role. What was the compelling factor? Help me understand why you felt the need to go after yet another relationship. And then I slowly began to unpack, like, well, why did you feel like you needed that validation? Why did you feel like you needed somebody to take care of you? What was it that was driving you to constantly seek the attention of other people? And then and at the same time, I'm learning about myself, right? Through my therapy sessions and whatnot, I'm unpacking elements of what's driving me. So I'm kind of asking the same questions and kind of applying what I'm learning about myself to understanding more about her and her relationship with her mother, and how did how did that all come to be? So the twisted knot that ultimately I ended up with from all these various conversations with Clara, I was taking notes, voracious notes, and trying to understand who was related to who and what person's relationship yielded this, and just kind of put it all together was just very confusing to me. And then she told me some things like she would give me a vignette, some sort of story about something that happened to her, and I'm like, that didn't happen. Like, come on, there's no way that happened. And then I would have to go find a history book in the library or whatever, and I'm reading up on doing some research on the time period. I'm like, huh, that happened. That really happened. Oh, okay. It's not something you're taught about in history books, so that became fascinating to me. And I started making notes in the margins on my outline of her personal life, like, yes, this happened, and here's a reference, and here's the book, well, anyway, I wrote out about 20 pages, thereabouts, 18 pages of outline of her life, trying to keep track of all the details. And then it told such a fascinating story, and I was intrigued by the way it intertwined so much with heavy, heavy topics and events in our human history, relatively recent human history, the last 150 years, 200 years, I guess. Um, I decided to make my outline into a more sophisticated outline by writing out all the in between sentences, not just my shorthand. And I figured I would show it to somebody like a ghostwriter and let them run with it, see what comes of it. Um, and then I happened to bump into somebody who ultimately became my editor and publisher. And she said, "Well, let me read what you got." She read like the first 10 pages, and she said, "Well, I want to read the next 10 pages." So she read the first 20 pages. And then she said, "I'm 20 pages into this, and I think you got something here. So we need to, I'll work with you on this, but I think you need to tell the story. This is your story. Nobody else can write this book." And I was like, all right. I'm a numbers guy. Write a book. Words. All right, fine. So I went through the effort and worked with her for about a year, heavy editing. Um, and she said, "All right, well, what do you want to do now? Let's publish this. Let's publish." And I was like, "All right, well, do we have to? Well, I suppose we could. Sure, why not? It's the easiest way to get I figured friends and family. I figure I give them as a Christmas gift or something like that, right?" Um, the long and the short of it is, uh, we ended up publishing a book. I wasn't necessarily looking to publish a book. I was just trying to organize my notes and keep it straight with regard to what her life was actually all about. And yeah, next thing I know, I got a book out on Amazon, and I was like, well, all right, I've got a book I've published. I guess I want people to read it.
And how do you get it to the attention of people?
Well, that's a whole other thing, right? I had no idea what it meant to become an author or to market a book. I was a babe in the woods. I did not know anything about Goodreads. I didn't know anything about library thing. I knew nothing about any of this stuff. I was like, it was just always just a mystery to me. I just had no idea. my publisher helped me out with a few things. She was able to point me in the direction of a few other platforms that some of our other authors had used. And I started there and slowly but surely started getting the word out, and I got some people to review it, and they were like, wow, this is such a fresh take on what historical fiction can actually be like. People started comparing me to names that, quite frankly, because I'm not wasn't in the literary arts, they started comparing me to names that I had to look up to really appreciate the comparisons. But when I did look them up, and I was like, wow, that's high praise to be compared to that kind of talent. So, well, maybe was this a flash in the pan? Was this just because the story is so personal and so vulnerable and so close to me? That's what they see. That's what they feel. That there's a high level of emotion that runs through every page in that book. And that's because it's so personal and so close to me.
So tell us why
Can
you
I?
called it The Road to my Rescue. I like that part of the story.
Yeah. The road to Moresco has like multiple meanings to it. Uh, First off, there is a town in Italy called Moresco. So there you could literally go on I think it's the Via Flaminia, the road that leads east out of Rome. Goes across the mountains, goes towards the Adriatic Sea, goes close to Ancora or Ancona. Anyway, there's a town there, one of the more established towns called Monte Rubiano, and very close to Monte Rubiano, in its shadow, there's a town called Moresco. Um, so you could literally take a road and go to Moresco. Maria Luisa Moresco was my maternal grandmother. Chiara Moresco was my birth mother. The road to Moresco, for me, was a journey towards finding them and understanding my story of origin. And then finally, once you read the book, the journey to Moresco really takes on a whole other meaning, because you find that you, as an individual reader reading the book, you have taken a personal journey as well. Not necessarily to Moresco per se, but you've taken a personal journey to understand perhaps more about your own relationships. You think differently about your own life. So it creates a journey for the reader. It chronicles a journey that I took, which was a very emotional one, and it implies a very physical, a practical journey that one could take visiting Italy itself. So that's why it's called The Road to Moresco.
I see there's a lot of power in what you did for yourself by writing that book, by facing your history and bringing it all forward and knowing this is where you came from.
Yeah.
I
Absolutely.
think that gave you some satisfaction, and just to know who you are, so that next
Yeah,
time you have to do a family tree, you've got a family to put there, right?
exactly. I'm ready to pass that test back in fourth grade now.
Yeah. Okay. So your next book that you wrote was to do with Augustus.
Yeah, completely left field. Um, and again, it's sort of an accident. Again, um, I was toying with the idea. I was like, well, should I? People were saying I have good storytelling capabilities, and they loved my prose, and I got great reviews on the first book, and a lot of high praise, which made me think, well, maybe I need to write a second book just to test the waters to see, are these people just blowing smoke? Um, I would like to know if I really do have a voice that people are going to be interested in hearing as I tell stories. But I had no idea what I was going to write about. I had no interest in writing a prequel or a sequel or anything like that. The story, Road to Moresco, sits on its own, and it's powerful and poignant because it is that unique element of history and personal lives as relates to my story of origin. Enough said. Not going to belabor the point. Not going to create a whole nother layer to that. It's set, right? Set in stone. I had no idea what I was going to write about. And I saw this news article talking about how they found this ivory statue of the goddess Lakshmi, which is a Buddhist or Hindu goddess. They found this ivory statue in the ashes of Pompeii. Pompeii was buried by Vesuvius ash in 68 AD. I mean, I do yoga, but I had no idea. And I know yoga is an ancient thing that goes back thousands of years, but I had no idea that the Indian subcontinent and the Roman Empire were connected in any way, shape, or form. So, Pompeii was a very wealthy town. They well traveled. So I began to investigate what element of this high end of society was somehow connected to India. And what was that all about? And I started doing research. Oh, here we go. He does the research. He starts taking notes. Next thing you know, I've got an outline. When the story sort of evolved, I think the main trigger and reason I ended up becoming so invested in understanding more about it and being willing to write the story was discovering that it was Augustus and his effort to free both the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea of pirates that really opened up avenues of trade and allowed for these ships and trade routes to really open up and develop between India and Rome. When I started reading more about Augustus to find out why he was incented to do this, what were the motivations, and learn more about how he came to be in the position where it was reliant on him to clear the pirates and to create these pathways, is when I discovered that he was, in essence, pushed into the public light because he was adopted by Julius Caesar, who happened to be the brother to his maternal grandmother. I mean, come on. Adopted son makes good. Just story writes itself. One of my biggest challenges, however, with it was there is so much written about Augustus and there's so much written about the Roman Empire that my story really had to take on a much different stance. I really had to go about this in a much different way. So that was my big challenge, to bring the humanity element of it and try to avoid getting mired down in lots of discussion about senatorial proceedings and battles and things like that. I wanted to focus more on the relationships that Augustus had as a man with his wife, wives, his daughter, his friends, that kind of thing. I wanted to focus more on that, especially since I'm doing historical fiction. But I will say, though, I was sure to get professors of antiquity to read the manuscript before I even got close to publishing it and weigh in on and let me know whether or not I did the period, the people, and the atmosphere justice with my writing. Yeah. Once I got there,
Was that book
But
as successful as the first one?
it seems, yeah, it's getting very similar awards and very similar type of feedback. Um, High ratings, 4 or 5 star ratings, whatever. Um, yeah, so I'm on my third. No,
So it goes to show that adoption has been around for a long time and that it will be around for many, many years to come.
I think that's a fair statement. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's something that we cannot drop totally out of our world. It's something that has to be there in order to assist children that need help,
Yep.
and even some adults too that need it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think, in the broader span of things, we have a much more narrow perception of what adoption means in today's world than they did a couple thousand years ago. You would literally adopt an adult person to be part of your family because you loved them and you wanted to pass part of your estate on to them. I mean, that it was more a matter of expressing a bond and extending a familial obligation, as opposed to, well, we only think of it now as something for children, right? In terms of
Right.
protection and home and nurturing and things like that. So the definition has definitely narrowed with time.
Well, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with us today.
Yeah.
As you can see, it's a fascinating story because it's brought out the history from Mark. It's told him where he comes from. He's found out everything to know about his birth roots and the place Moresco. He hasn't been there yet, except through Google,
Mm.
but one day he
Right.
will get there. He will get there.
Someday. Yes, yes, absolutely.
So thank you for joining us on Roots and Branches Adoption Stories. If today's conversation resonated with you, please subscribe, share this episode, and tell others about it. You can find us on www.youtube.com/the Roots and Branches AS. And you can find us at the Roots and Branches website as well. So I'm Janet Munro on KFred Radio. Until next time, remember that our roots shape us, but the branches connect us, and every adoption story deserves to be told. Thank you.